I'm having a tough time putting all my thoughts into coherent sentences about our current COVID-19 situation and living in a climate-changing world. These situations may not seem to have much in common on the surface, but they sure do impact our everyday lives, whether we explicitly notice it or not. I've been looking back at some footage I took from a couple holiday trips last year, and it's gotten me thinking about ecological grief and the hypocrisy that I feel in relation to my own impact on the climate. And I think that's a pretty common feeling to have, especially with young people seeking to get educated about climate issues. Ashley Consolo and Neville Ellis describe the ecological grief phenomenon as the grief felt in relation to experienced or anticipated ecological losses, including the loss of species, ecosystems, and meaningful landscapes due to acute or chronic environmental change. They argue that it is a natural response, one that deserves more attention in climate discourse and one that affects most people, but especially those whose livelihoods and culture are deeply connected to the natural environment. I think about the stories I'd overhear during my stay with family in Chile. I remember visiting my dad's childhood farm and him remarking about how different it was, since he hadn't been there in more than 25 years. How there used to be no roads, not even the one we travelled on, and no electricity or running water. I remember overhearing the neighbouring farmers talk about the newly introduced eucalyptus trees and how they suck up all the water and leave native species to die. And this is not even taking into account the wider indigenous Mapuche experience of the continuing dispossession of their land. During this time, Chile was in the midst of a still ongoing social unrest, which saw its citizens fighting against the severe social inequalities they continue to face. While this topic is much too complex to get into for this video, I want to highlight how ecological issues are not separate from the social ones, yet they are often treated as if they are. It is impossible to fix one without changing the other. The farmers talked about their financial struggles in maintaining the land, and the city dwellers about their struggles to make ends meet. They would remark on the changing climate, how even in the summer you could see snow coating the surrounding Andes mountains, whereas I could now only see snow on the peaks. This is an example of grief associated with physical ecological losses and the loss of identity. I empathized with their pain, but realized my position as outsider. My livelihood is not directly affected by these situations, so I know that my own personal grief comes from second-hand experiences. And yes, in talking about ecological grief, I do realise and reflect on my own impacts. I took a 14-hour flight from Melbourne to Santiago. That's approximately 3.13 tonnes of CO2 emissions return. The irony is not lost on me. It's a harsh dichotomy of retrospectively using my family holiday to talk about climate grief and wanting to make a difference, knowing well I've negatively impacted the climate in doing so. This brings me to climate art. I'm a big believer in the necessity of art, which evokes reaction related to certain issues. It's a source of effective material, targeting the emotions rather than pure statistical knowledge. Joanna Nurmis describes what climate art can do in a climate-changing world. It can educate the senses, providing a space for imagining what can be done and what the future will bring. While it can't save the world, it can intervene and think of ways of educating and adapting where some disciplines cannot. With the Weather Project, Oliver Eliasson immerses the participant in his recreation of the sun, highlighting our interconnectivity with the natural environment, how we are not mutually exclusive entities. I believe experiencing art and making art ourselves is very beneficial for the continuing ecological grieving process, especially now in such uncertain times.